Now that we have made this broth, the obvious thing to do with it is probably soup. Now we eat soup year-round in all seasons, and I use whatever I can find in that season to make it. I very rarely go out of my way to go buy different ingredients to make a very specific recipe. We eat soup almost every single day, and I find it to be the most convenient portable food out there, since you can pour soup in a thermos like this and hand it to your husband or your child or yourself and take it to work, and you can enjoy it, and it will be nice and warm or hot depending on when you poured it in. Now you can keep your soup simple and brothy, like a miso soup where you make with fish broth and you add some seaweed or something to that, or you can use a beef broth, chicken broth, land animal broth, and add some eggs to that to make an egg drop soup. You can make it smooth and drinkable like a butternut squash or a potato, sweet potato, split pea soup, so it's actually going to be a pureed soup. You can make a real hearty soup like a stew or a gumbo, or you can cream it up just like a bisque. Let me show you an example of two of the versions of soup that I make a lot in my kitchen. So, first one is a butternut squash soup, and I got some butternut squash right here. You don't have to worry about chopping it up into very small pieces. It's going to be pureed anyway. So we'll do that. The next one, right here we got some sweet potatoes. I just cut the rough pieces of the sweet potato so that I can still get some of the fiber from the skin of the sweet potato. Next one, we don't have onions right now in season, so I'm just going to add lots of garlic today. So we chopped up some elephant garlic like this. And then the last ingredient right now is apple, to sweeten it up a little bit, especially if you're going to make it nice and peppy or spicy. And the next one we're going to make is a hearty beef with sprouted lentils, greens, sweet potatoes, and squash. Let me get these ingredients. So we're going to start with sweet potatoes. So we add some sweet potatoes to the bottom of the pan. We have some squash over here. I chopped it up into really nice small blocks. If I'm going to make a hearty soup, I'm definitely going to make it into pieces that's bite-sized that I can eat with a spoon. So we add this, and we'll add that. Let's add some of the finer ingredients. So we do have green onions in season right now, so I chopped up some green onions. And since we are not pureeing this soup, it needs to be nice little pieces like that. I chopped up some shiitake mushrooms and add that. And then some elephant garlic chopped up into small bite-sized pieces. Now, for the meat, when I cooked the broth, there was some pieces of meat that was still on the bones, and after the broth was done cooking, I just peeled the pieces off. But you can use some shredded chicken, you can use some shredded pork, you can use some shredded beef, you can use some smoked pork hocks, add that. Now the last two ingredients, I sprouted some lentils over here, and as you can see, this whole sprouts grew out food right here. So we'll add this whole bowl. So in the greens, we have dandelion greens, we have tatsoi, we have arugula, and we have daikon radish greens, so radish greens. So I'm going to add this to here. So in both these soups we have to season them up, and you have to decide what kind of flavor you're going to go for your soup. Since, for instance, this one has got so many sweet potatoes in and it's got the apple in there, it's going to be a nice sweet soup. So I can make it nice and spicy, and the spicy sweetness will add to each other. So this way I'm going to spice this one. We're going to start off with some salt, and you can always add extra salt. It's hard to take the salt back. Alright. I'm going to make a curried coconut creamed butternut squash soup here. So I'm going to add tablespoon of curry powder, and then a tablespoon of turmeric. And since I actually have the luxury of having a little bit of a smoked broth here, I'm also going to add a little bit of smoked paprika to add to that smoke flavor. So just a little bit of smoked paprika, like that. Now I'm going to add about 2 quarts of broth over that. Please add all the fat to it too, very important. Yeah. Alright, now we're spicing up. This one has got beef in it, and it's got some sweet potatoes in it, so I'm going to add some heat to this one too, in the form of maybe red pepper. Actually, let me add some red pepper to both of them. So I'll add a nice big fat pinch of red pepper. Let me add some red pepper to this one too. Not too spicy. But since there's beef in there today, I'm actually going to add a chili flavor to it. So I got some chili powder over here. It's a really nice blend of spices. And we add about a tablespoon of it. And a tablespoon of herbs of Provence. And it looks like I'm just going to empty this thing in here. I'm going to add some salt. There's absolutely no salt in my broth, so we could add salt if you want the salt in there. And then the last thing you want to add to this, the pot with the beef in it, is the broth. And as you can see, that piece of fat is drifting on top. I just break it in half so that it doesn't mess up pouring. You don't want to make it too thick, so you want to add a little bit more water, so we're going to add some water to this. About 2 inches under the lip of the pot is good. Let's add a little bit of water to this one. What I can say about these 2 pots right now, we have this one with the chili, spices, and the green herbs. They both have broth in it. This one was smoked, this one was not. This is a very hearty, highly fibrous soup, and when this one comes out of the oven, it's completely ready to eat. You can just eat this one like is. With these 2 pots right now, we need to stir them up just a little bit. This one's a little trickier, but you'll see it actually pushes through very easily. The temperature that you're going to put these 2 pots at is going to depend on how long you're going to leave it in your oven for. If you have to leave it in your oven 12 hours, I would suggest putting the temperature of this at about 180 to 185 degrees. If you're going to put it in the oven just overnight for about 6 hours, then I would recommend putting it at 225 to 250 degrees. Now, if you didn't want to eat broth in soup form, I have some other tricks up my sleeve. One way is to take a quart of broth. I know this is not a quart, but taking a quart of broth like this and then switching it on high on a saucepan and boiling it down and boiling it down, boiling it down until it's about a quarter of what that was. And that will be a very gelatinous, viscous type of liquid called a demi-glace. and you can flavor that up, or you can use that to saute some onions and garlic and mushrooms together, and you can add that on top of some delicious vegetables as a topping almost, or add it on top of some meat or on a burger or something like that. The way I'm going to show you today is making a white sauce or a cheese sauce. Now, a traditional white sauce is made with milk and cream, and or milk or cream, and flour and fat, or flour and butter mixed together, made a roux, and that roux thickens up the milk, and then you get a white sauce from that. And you can add some cheese if you wanted to add some cheese, and have a cheese white sauce. But instead of using milk, you can also use broth. But I'm going to make a combination of the two. So if you didn't want to use any milk products, whether it happened to be dairy or non-dairy sources like coconut milk, we were going to use half broth and half milk today. But you can use just broth if you wanted to use just broth. So we're going to take this broth. Definitely need that fat in there too. We're going to pour it in. It's kind of a viscous liquid. Okay. And then we're going to bring this to a complete boil. Now, a thickener can be very many different things. Like I said, a roux is a flour plus a fat. Now, there's other ways to thicken up something too. If you're going to thicken up a gumbo, for instance, you also use a roux. But there's another way to thicken up a gumbo, and that's using some gumbo filé powder. This is ground up sassafras leaves, and it will thicken up a gumbo for you and give a great flavor. The other way is obviously cornstarch, but I prefer arrowroot powder to cornstarch, and it works very similar. So in this setup today, we're going to take a little bit of the milk that I was going to use. So I was going to use 2 cups of broth and 2 cups of milk. And I'm going to wait for this broth to heat up a little bit. I'm going to take a little bit of this milk and pour it into another cup and add 2 tablespoons of arrowroot to that. 1, 2 tablespoons. Now that the broth started boiling, I'm going to add some salt to it. Do this boiling mixture, we're going to add the milk. It's going to cool it right down. And as soon as the milk that's been added warms up to more or less the temperature of the broth and it starts boiling, you remove it from the heat source. Arrowroot powder works a lot better when it's not just constantly boiling the whole time. So we got the milk and the broth in here with the salt, and we're going to add a little bit of milk with the 2 tablespoons of arrowroot to that. And then it starts thickening up already. Okay, this is a white sauce at this point. You can add some pepper to that and some other spices, and you can already start using it on top of vegetables or whatever. But I'm going to add, I grated up a 8-ounce block of some herbed strong cheese. So it's going to be a really nice strong flavor that's going to go in here, very cheesy. This is a dill and chive cheese. I'm adding that in here. You can really use any cheese for this. You can make a blue cheese one, you could make a Parmesan one, you can make a Romano cheese one. Whatever cheese you have to your availability. And that would be the consistency of a cheese sauce if I'm going to mix it in with a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to treat it very similar to a gravy. Now, this is only 2 tablespoons of arrowroot powder. If you want to have a much thicker cheese sauce, like for instance, if you wanted to take some cooked broccoli and you want to stick it in there and you want it to stay on top of that, you're going to have to do a little bit more to thicken up this sauce right here. You would have to add extra roux, or you would have to add extra arrowroot or extra cornstarch or whatever the thickener was that you decided you were going to use. And then you can add whatever extra spices you want to add. If you wanted to add a little bit of smoke flavor, you can add some smoked paprika to this. And it's a really nice sauce right here. Now, it could be enjoyed in many different ways. You can use this as the cheese sauce on mac and cheese, or a cheese sauce to go over vegetables or broccoli or so on. You can use it as a cheese fondue and have people just dip their things in this really great sauce. Or you can thicken it up a little bit more than what it is, and you can cool it down completely, and you can use that as a cheese spread on crackers or on a sandwich or something like that. And that's cheese sauce made from broth.